What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, the President of the United States has threatened to erase an entire civilization of 90 million people, and nobody in Washington is doing anything to stop him? Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. We are standing at the edge of the most dangerous moment in modern history. In the past 72 hours, something has shifted in the halls of power that should terrify every person on this planet. Donald Trump took to Truth Social and issued a threat so brazen, so unprecedented, that former intelligence officers are now openly calling him insane, not as an insult, as a clinical assessment. If you're captivated by the unfolding crisis in the Middle East and want to understand what the mainstream media refuses to tell you, smash that like button and let the algorithm know you demand the truth. Every click helps expose what powerful interests want to keep hidden. The President of the United States has declared that Iranian civilization will die tonight. Those are his words, not paraphrased, not exaggerated. He said civilization will die. And as I speak to you now, we are mere hours away from a deadline that could trigger events that reshape the entire global order. But here is what nobody is telling you. This threat did not come out of nowhere. It came after one of the most catastrophic military failures in American special operations history. A failure so devastating that the White House is scrambling to cover it up. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what went wrong, who is responsible, and why the next few hours could determine whether we descend into a conflict that makes every war of the past century look like a minor skirmish. Let me take you back to what happened just days ago in the deserts of Iran, because this is where the story truly begins. And I need you to pay close attention because the details matter. Two MC-130 aircraft, massive military transport planes loaded with special operations helicopters, launched from a forward base with a mission that the Pentagon still refuses to acknowledge publicly. Officially, they were conducting a combat search and rescue operation to recover a downed American pilot. But here is what the official story does not explain. The force structure on those aircraft was not configured for search and rescue. It was configured for something else entirely. On board those planes were operators from SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. These are Tier 1 special operations units, the absolute elite of American military capability. And here is the thing you need to understand. SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force do not conduct combat search and rescue. That is not their mission profile. They are trained for direct action, hostage rescue, and most critically, they are trained for one very specific type of operation that the government rarely discusses publicly: nuclear seizure missions. Think about that for a moment. The most highly trained special operators in the United States military, specialists in securing nuclear materials, were loaded onto aircraft supposedly to rescue one pilot. The math does not add up. And when you examine the evidence that has leaked out since the operation failed, the true picture becomes horrifyingly clear. Identity cards recovered from the wreckage belonged to personnel with nuclear expertise. Equipment manifests included specialized breaching tools designed not for scaling mountains, as the president claimed, but for descending into them, into underground facilities, into the kind of hardened tunnel complexes that Iran uses to protect its most sensitive nuclear materials. This was not a rescue mission. This was an attempted raid on Iran's uranium enrichment facilities near Isfahan, and it failed catastrophically. But here is where the story takes a turn that should send chills down your spine. Stay with me because what I am about to tell you explains everything that has happened since. The operation was compromised before it ever launched, not by Iranian intelligence gathering, not by sophisticated electronic surveillance. It was compromised by the very people who should have been protecting its secrecy. In early March, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, stood before the United States Congress in open session and declared that the intelligence community has a good idea where Iran's uranium is located. Think about the implications of that statement. If you are sitting in Tehran and you hear the American intelligence chief announce publicly that they know where your most sensitive nuclear materials are stored, what do? You move them, you fortify the locations, you prepare defenses, you assume an attack is coming. But it got worse. Days later, the Wall Street Journal published detailed information about American planning for a potential raid, airfield seizure operations, multi-day mission profiles. The article read like an operational briefing that someone had handed directly to the enemy, and in a very real sense, that is exactly what happened. The Iranians knew we were coming. They knew where we would land. They knew what we were after. And when those MC-130 aircraft touched down on that improvised airstrip, the Iranians were waiting. What happened next has been classified at the highest levels. But here is what we know from multiple sources. The aircraft became bogged down on the runway, overloaded with equipment for a mission they were never actually configured to complete. At least one of the aircraft sustained damage from Iranian anti-aircraft fire. Physical evidence recovered from the wreckage confirms this, despite official denials. The mission had to be aborted. The special operators never reached their objective. And somewhere in the chaos of that failed operation, American service members lost their lives. The exact number remains classified. The circumstances remain shrouded in secrecy, but the outcome is undeniable. America's most elite warriors were sent on an impossible mission that had been telegraphed to the enemy weeks in advance, and they paid the price for leadership failures at the highest levels. Now, you understand why the president is threatening genocide, not because Iran poses an imminent threat to America, but because conventional military options have failed. And when you have already sacrificed your best operators on a mission that was doomed from the start, what options remain? This is the question that keeps former military planners awake at night. And the answer the president has arrived at should terrify every human being on earth. Let me be absolutely clear about what is being threatened here. When the president speaks of ending Iranian civilization, when the vice president references tools in the toolbox that have not yet been used, they are talking about nuclear weapons. There is no other interpretation that makes sense. And I need you to understand something about what nuclear weapons used against Iran would actually mean, not in abstract terms, in concrete, horrifying reality. Iran is a nation of 90 million people, 90 million human beings with families, with dreams, with lives that matter exactly as much as yours or mine. The majority of them are young. The median age in Iran is around 32 years old. These are not the architects of whatever policies the American government opposes. These are ordinary people who wake up every day trying to provide for their families, trying to build better lives, trying to survive in a world that has subjected them to crushing economic sanctions for decades. To threaten the annihilation of these 90 million people is not foreign policy. It is not negotiation. It is the articulation of genocidal intent by the leader of the most powerful military force in human history. And here is what makes this moment different from every nuclear threat that has come before. During the Cold War, nuclear deterrence was based on mutually assured destruction. Both sides understood that any nuclear exchange would result in their own annihilation, but Iran does not possess nuclear weapons. They cannot retaliate in kind. What the president is threatening is not deterrence. It is premeditated mass murder against a nation that cannot strike back with equivalent force. Justice Robert Jackson, the American prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, warned that aggressive war is the supreme international crime because it contains within itself the accumulated evil of all other war crimes. Every atrocity flows from that original sin of unprovoked aggression. And now we have an American president threatening to commit aggressive war with nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state. If this happens, the United States will have committed the greatest war crime in human history, greater than anything perpetrated by Nazi Germany. greater than the horrors of Imperial Japan. The scale would be unprecedented, and every American who remains silent while this threat hangs in the air becomes complicit in what follows. But I want you to understand something else, something that the architects of this potential catastrophe seem not to have considered. Iran is not defenseless. And what happens if they are pushed to the point where they believe their civilization truly faces extinction? Stay with me, because in the next part, I am going to explain what Iran can actually do in response. And believe me, the consequences extend far beyond the Middle East. They will reach into your daily life in ways you have not yet imagined. For years, Iran has maintained what military strategists call escalation control. When attacked, they respond proportionally. When Israel struck chemical facilities inside Iran, Iran immediately responded by destroying critical chemical plants in Saudi Arabia, not Iranian facilities, Saudi facilities. The Sabak plant, one of the largest petrochemical facilities in the world, was rendered inoperable in a matter of hours. Think about what that means. 22% of global petroleum-based chemical supplies just disappeared from the market. The products manufactured at those facilities, the plastics, the fertilizers, the industrial chemicals that modern civilization depends upon, they are simply not available anymore. There is no alternative production capacity that can be brought online quickly. The global economy just absorbed a wound that will take years to heal, and that was Iran's response to a limited strike on their chemical infrastructure. What happens if the United States launches what the president is threatening? Iran has made clear that they possess the capability to eliminate every desalination plant in Israel and across the Gulf Arab states, every single one. And you need to understand what that would mean for the nations that depend on those facilities for survival. Israel has no significant natural freshwater sources. The Jordan River is depleted. The Sea of Galilee is a fraction of its historical size. Groundwater aquifers are contaminated and overdrawn. The only thing keeping millions of Israelis alive is desalinated seawater. Remove that capability, and within weeks, you have a humanitarian catastrophe unlike anything the modern world has witnessed. The same is true for the Gulf Arab states, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Kuwait. These gleaming cities in the desert exist only because of desalination technology. The aquifers beneath them are effectively depleted. Rainfall is negligible. Without desalinated water, these nations cannot support human life at anything approaching their current populations. You cannot drink oil. That is what one analyst said to me, and the simplicity of that statement captures the existential vulnerability of an entire region. Billions of dollars in infrastructure, millions of people, all dependent on facilities that Iran has demonstrated it can destroy. If Iran is pushed to the point of civilizational extinction, they have every incentive to ensure that their enemies face the same fate, not through nuclear weapons, through the systematic destruction of the infrastructure that makes modern life possible in a desert region that cannot naturally support large human populations. And here is what terrifies strategic planners. Iran has shown no hesitation in responding to attacks, none. The old assumption was that Iran would absorb punishment, calculate carefully, and avoid escalation that might bring American military might down upon them. That assumption has been proven wrong repeatedly over the past months. Every strike against Iran has been met with immediate, decisive retaliation. The escalation ladder that American planners assumed they could control has become a mechanism that Iran climbs without hesitation. What happens when a nation that responds to every attack with immediate counterattack is told that its civilization will be erased tonight? The answer is already unfolding. Qatar has announced the closure of Al Udeid Air Base, one of the largest American military installations in the Middle East. American forces are being told to leave. The strategic position that America spent decades building in the region is collapsing, not because of military defeat, but because host nations can see what is coming and want no part of it. And that brings me to the global implications of what the president has threatened, because this is not just about the Middle East anymore. This is about the entire international order that has existed since World War II. If the United States uses nuclear weapons preemptively against a non nuclear state, every treaty, every norm, every assumption about how powerful nations behave becomes meaningless. Russia and China have watched American aggression with growing alarm for years. They have maintained a pragmatic approach, calculating that working with the United States, however difficult, is preferable to direct confrontation. That calculation changes instantly if nuclear weapons are used against Iran. At that point, the United States becomes a pariah state, not because of rhetoric, because of actions that demonstrate there are no red lines, no limits, no restraints on American willingness to use ultimate weapons against nations that cannot retaliate in kind. What do you think Russia's nuclear posture becomes at that moment? What do you think China's calculations look like? If America can use nuclear weapons against Iran with impunity, what stops them from using nuclear weapons against anyone? The answer is nothing. And that answer transforms every nuclear armed state into an existential threat to every other nation on Earth. The post World War II order, for all its flaws, was built on the assumption that nuclear weapons would only be used in retaliation against nuclear attack. That assumption prevented nuclear war for 80 years. It is about to be shattered by a president who cannot achieve his objectives through conventional means and has decided that genocide is an acceptable alternative. But I need to tell you about something else, something that offers a slim ray of hope in this darkness, because there is an off ramp, there is a path that could end this crisis without apocalyptic consequences. And understanding that path requires understanding what Iran actually wants. For decades, Iran's government has pursued a single overriding objective: the lifting of economic sanctions that have strangled their economy and impoverished their people. That is what this has always been about, not religious ideology, not regional conquest, the simple desire to participate fully in the global economy, to sell their oil, to trade with other nations, to give their people the prosperity that their resources should provide. The nuclear program that so terrifies Washington is a bargaining chip. It always has been. Iran agreed to strict limitations on that program under the JCPOA agreement negotiated during the Obama administration. They complied with every requirement. International inspectors verified their compliance repeatedly, and then the United States withdrew from the agreement and reimposed sanctions anyway. Think about that from Iran's perspective. They made a deal, they kept their end of the bargain, and America broke its word anyway. Why would they ever trust American promises again? And yet, even now, even after everything that has happened, Iran has indicated willingness to negotiate. The framework for a solution exists. Iran returns to strict safeguards on their nuclear program. International monitoring continues. In exchange, sanctions are lifted permanently. Iran rejoins the international community as a full participant. Their economy recovers, their people benefit. The existential threat that has driven this conflict evaporates. But there is one additional element that could make this work. One creative solution that addresses the damage that has already been done without requiring the United States to admit fault directly. What if Iran was allowed to establish a tolling station at the Strait of Hormuz? Not permanent control, a temporary arrangement monitored by international bodies that allows Iran to collect fees that would fund reconstruction of the damage caused by this conflict. Set a target, amount determined by neutral parties. Once that amount is collected, control reverts to international maritime law. The United States never has to write a reparations check. Iran gets the resources they need to rebuild, and both sides can claim a form of victory. The president could announce that he has achieved what no other president achieved: a permanent solution to the Iranian nuclear question. Whether the American people would believe that narrative is uncertain, but it provides a path back from the brink. The question is whether anyone in Washington has the wisdom to take that path, or whether pride and stubbornness and the influence of those who profit from endless war will push us over the edge into catastrophe. And that brings me to Israel, because we cannot understand this crisis without understanding the role that Israel has played in creating it, and what happens to Israel if this conflict continues down its current trajectory. Benjamin Netanyahu has pursued a strategy of drawing the United States into direct military confrontation with Iran for decades. This has been the consistent thread through every Israeli government policy: weaken Iran, isolate Iran, and eventually convince America to destroy Iran militarily so that Israel does not have to. In September of 2023, Netanyahu declared that the announcement of the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor was the most important day in modern Israeli history. The corridor was supposed to position Israel as a dominant economic power in the region, a hub through which trade between Asia and Europe would flow, generating wealth and legitimacy that would finally cement Israel's place among the nations of the Middle East. That vision is dead now. The corridor will never be built. The Abraham Accords that were supposed to normalize relations between Israel and the Arab world have collapsed under the weight of Israeli actions in Gaza. The regional integration that Netanyahu promised has become regional isolation, more complete than at any point since the founding of the state. And here is what the Israeli government seems not to understand: they have gotten what they wanted. American military forces are engaged against Iran. The United States is doing exactly what Israel has pushed for decades, and it is destroying Israel more completely than any external enemy could. Who will pay for Israeli reconstruction? The country has absorbed massive damage from Iranian strikes, strikes that Israel has systematically lied about, claiming successful interceptions while videos circulate showing missiles impacting their targets. The Israeli economy is not functioning normally. International investment has fled. The talent and capital that drove Israeli technology innovation are relocating to safer shores. If Iran responds to American nuclear threats by eliminating Israeli water infrastructure, as they have indicated they are prepared to do, what happens to the 6 million Jews living in that narrow strip of land? They have options that others do not. Many hold dual citizenship. They can board planes and ships and scatter to the diaspora communities that exist throughout the world. But that is not survival for Israel as a state. That is dissolution. That is the end of the Zionist project in everything but name. And the Iranians understand this. They do not need nuclear weapons to create consequences that Israel cannot survive. They need only to systematically destroy the infrastructure that makes modern life possible in a semi-arid region with no natural water resources. The tools to accomplish this already exist in Iranian arsenals. The will to use them has been demonstrated repeatedly. So Israel has drawn America into a war that America cannot win through conventional means. And the response from the American president is to threaten genocide, which, if carried out, will almost certainly result in Iranian retaliation that ends Israel as a functioning state. The very outcome that Israeli policy was supposed to prevent has been made inevitable by Israeli policy itself. There is a bitter irony here that future historians will marvel at. The nation that has spent 70 years arguing that its survival depends on American protection has engineered a situation where American actions guarantee its destruction. But I want to return to where we started, because in a few hours, the deadline the president has set will arrive, and what happens then determines everything that follows. Their voices within the American government calling for sanity. Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ro Khanna have called for invoking the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office on grounds of incapacity. The mere fact that a sitting president is threatening genocide is evidence, they argue, that he is no longer mentally fit to hold the office. They are correct. A president who threatens to kill 90 million civilians is not fit to command the armed forces of the United States. The Constitution provides mechanisms for removing such a president. Those mechanisms should be invoked immediately, but there is no serious movement to do so. The Republican Party remains silent. The Democratic Party issues statements of concern, but takes no action. The cabinet members who could initiate 25th Amendment proceedings remain loyal to a man threatening crimes against humanity. The generals who could refuse unlawful orders continue to follow the chain of command, and the American people go about their daily lives as if nothing is happening, as if the President of the United States threatening to commit genocide is simply another news cycle to be scrolled past on their phones. This is the moment when history judges a nation not by its rhetoric, by its actions, and the actions of the American people in the hours and days ahead will determine whether this country retains any claim to moral legitimacy in the eyes of the world. We elected this president. That is a fact we cannot escape. The responsibility for what he does falls on all of us who failed to prevent his rise to power, who failed to constrain his worst impulses, who are failing right now to remove him from office before he commits the ultimate crime. If nuclear weapons are used against Iran, the United States becomes the greatest criminal nation in human history. Every American becomes complicit in genocide. Every nation that continues to deal with America becomes complicit as well. The international isolation that followed will make Cold War era sanctions look like minor inconveniences. And here is what I want to leave you with as we approach this moment of decision. There are still pathways to peace. There are still options that do not involve mass death. Iran has indicated willingness to negotiate. International mediators stand ready to facilitate talks. The framework for a sustainable agreement exists and has been proven workable in the past. All that is required is leadership, someone in a position of authority who is willing to say that genocide is not acceptable, that threatening to murder 90 million civilians is not a negotiating tactic, that the United States will not commit war crimes regardless of what Iran does or does not do. That voice must come from within the American government. It must come from military commanders who refuse unlawful orders. It must come from cabinet members who invoke constitutional remedies. It must come from legislators who prioritize their oath to the Constitution over their loyalty to a political party. And if that voice does not emerge, if the machinery of American government proves incapable of stopping a president bent on genocide, then the voice must come from the American people themselves, in the streets, at the ballot box, through every nonviolent means available to citizens of a democracy that is still technically functional. Because if we do not stop this, we are not the good guys anymore. We are not the defenders of freedom and human rights that we have claimed to be for generations. We are the villains of history. And we will be remembered that way for as long as human civilization endures to remember anything at all. The next few hours will tell us which future we have chosen, and whatever happens, we will have no one to blame but ourselves. Do not stop here. The world is changing faster than anyone predicted, and understanding these changes is the only way to navigate what comes next. Click on the next video and join me as we continue to expose the forces shaping our future and the decisions that will determine whether humanity rises to meet this moment or falls into darkness from which there may be no return.